This is Suzanne Wagner of the C.G. Jung Institute of Los Angeles. In the next hour, you will be viewing a conversation with Barbara Hanna, a world-renowned Jungian analyst. At the time of this conversation, Miss Hanna was nearly 90 years old. Born in Brighton, England in 1891, Barbara Hanna was the daughter of an Anglican bishop. She grew up in the rarefied atmosphere of a cathedral close. As a young woman in her 20s, she left home to take up residence in Paris, where she pursued her vocation as an artist. During this time, she happened to read an essay by C.G. Jung entitled Woman in Europe. This became a life-changing experience as she decided to go to Switzerland to meet Jung. In time, after working in analysis with Jung and others, Barbara Hanna decided to stay in Switzerland to pursue her study of Jung's analytical psychology. She became one of Jung's most gifted students and worked as an analyst in her own right for over 50 years. She lectured frequently at the Jung Institute and published several books, among them Striving Toward Wholeness and Encounters with the Soul, Active Imagination. In 1976, she published a richly personal and humorous biographical memoir of Jung, which shows in great depth how his discoveries emerged from his own life experiences. This conversation was filmed in March 1977 in the square stone tower which Dr. Marie-Louise von Franz built for a retreat. Dr. von Franz shared this retreat with Miss Hanna over many years. It provided a place of solitude in which each could pursue writing and work with the psyche. Miss Hanna, can you tell me about your own life before you met Jung? I understand you were a painter, an artist.
A what?
An artist, that you lived in Paris.
Yes, I lived in Paris. Yes. Well, I've been trained as a painter. I was starting, and then the First World War came. Then I had to nurse for 4 years, and which I detested. And then I went back to art directly the war was over, and studied in London, Paris, and Rome. And then suddenly one morning I woke up and thought, there are enough pictures in the world, what on earth am I doing this for? And then at the same time I just read, came on the article on modern, I forgot what it's called now, modern woman of Jung's
In Europe. Modern woman in
Yes,
Europe.
Woman in Europe, that's right, yes. Woman in Europe in the Delphi magazine. And then I thought, this is the thing for me. So now, and I came down, and he didn't answer my letter. So I just came, he said, he saw afterwards, he said he saw it was a fatal thing. If I came down here, it would change my life completely. So he wasn't going to encourage me in it. I'd have to take all the steps myself. So I came down without an appointment or any answer or anything, just after Christmas in January 29. Then he was away, but he came back after about 3 or 4 days and saw me then.
And from then on you saw him regularly?
Yes, from then on. No, not quite from then on. I saw him regularly at the seminars and things like that, but he sent me to Tony Wolff, and I analyzed with her for about a year, yes, about, not quite. And then Peter Baines came out here, and they put me to him, but that wasn't a very great success. Well, he said, Jung said he couldn't have analysed me himself if he hadn't been a parson's son, because you see, I was brought up in a cathedral close. Everybody else was 90.
Well, when you went to Paris and Rome and London, was there a break with the church for you, with your Christian?
What?
Did you make a break with your own Christian background when you left to study art? In other words,
I forgot all. No, I didn't make a break with it. I went and saw my father once, twice a year, always. I never quarrelled with him in any way. I believe if he wasn't your father, he was a very nice man. And he wasn't a success as a father.
But as far as your own religious life was concerned,
it broke up completely. I didn't, except I had a feeling that there was something there and one ought to do what it wanted and not what one wanted to do oneself.
you already had that.
I had that feeling. The only prayer I ever prayed was, teach me from my heart to say, thy will be done. But I never did this. I dribbled down all the same till I came here. And then I saw the point of it better.
Well, you mentioned in your book that Jung wanted you to continue with your painting.
He did. Very badly for a long time. But then he did a very strange thing, which happened. At a lunch, Tony Wolfe asked him for my drawing of him, which appears in the book. And he said, oh, I don't know where it is. And that absolutely knocked the bottom out of it for me. And though I always went to analysis and told him everything that had happened, the worst things about myself, I never could mention that. For about 3 years. And then when I told him, he said, oh, and I said I hadn't been able to paint since. That really, because he liked the drawing, you see, or said he did. He did, I think. He told me then his family didn't like it, and they'd taken it away from him and hid it in it didn't come down again till after Mrs. Jung's death. She didn't like it at all. Well, most people don't, because it's fearfully introverted. And he was always very, well, he was an introvert, of course, but he was, for people, he was always there completely, and they felt repelled by that drawing, and then they didn't like it, naturally.
But for you then, that was a decisive moment when he forgot that.
It was a decisive moment, and he said afterwards, I'd never have done that. But I see now, it was the thing to do. I had to stop your drawing. But consciously, I thought you ought to continue.
Did you have any indications from the unconscious itself, from dreams, about that decision to drop it?
Well, you see, it had dropped, the bottom had really dropped out of it for me before I came here in Paris one morning. I woke up and thought that, why on earth add to all these paintings? Oh, an awful lot in Paris. And so I never wanted to. I only tried to stick to it to please him. I thought, oh, well, it doesn't really please him if he can't even remember where my drawing is, which I'd given him for his 60th birthday. So I then, it went, well, the bottom dropped out of it. I couldn't. But, you know, I used a good deal of it in writing.
You do?
I do, I find. I mean, I can't quite explain. Somebody wrote me the other day that really, in a way, it was my old painting that, I mean, I had produced a portrait
Yes.
of Jung, though I didn't try to or anything.
So, in a way, it was transformed, that spirit, into writing.
Yeah, exactly. I must say, I wanted to write when I was a child, but my mother made the very big mistake of immediately, whenever I wrote a poem or anything, sending it to a children's paper to be printed. So, of course, I had to get out of that. That's how I ever took to painting. Idiotic thing to do, really.
In your book, you talk about that period with Jung when it was so difficult with the unconscious, the years of real confrontation.
Yes.
And you indicate that the work he did then didn't ever have to be done again.
No, not that big. You see, really, I can't tell you what a terrible shock it was to him, that unconscious, and the encounter with it. And that was done so thoroughly that he wouldn't, never had to repeat it. But then there were a great many epilogues, things that happened, for instance, in Africa, and in North Africa, and then again in East Africa. That opened his eyes to things he hadn't realized at all. And that happened quite often with dreams and things. But the actual work on the unconscious, because you see, everything had to give way to it. He did go on analyzing, but he didn't really. Everything had to give way for it, of course. I suppose to a certain extent he did go on with his whole life exactly. I mean, he was making a name for himself all the time, but he was hating doing it. And as you know, he gave up the university lectures because he felt he was a mass of doubts himself, and why tell young people what to do.
Well, in your own life, did you experience that kind of a period of having to totally give up to the work on the unconscious?
Well, of course, it was quite different. I once had a dream which really, in a way, explained it. I dreamt that we both, Jung and I, minded most of all about wholeness, about becoming whole, and that I got at it through my art by always trying to draw or paint things that looked whole, animals, primitives, anything that seemed still at one with itself and whole. And he got at it by studying the things that were wrong with people, and then realizing the way to get it right was to find their wholeness, to find the opposite to the thing that was destroying them so terribly. But we both arrived at the same, well, in a way, I mean, the same interest we both arrived at, through quite different ways. So, I don't know, I didn't, of course I went through a fight, because after 2 years I worked only with him, and for a long time. And of course I went through tremendous encounter with the unconscious. One always does in analysis. Particularly with him, he didn't let you pick flowers by the way, sort of.
What about your own sense of the dark side in your interest in wholeness?
Well,
were you aware at all of the problem of evil?
Very much so. Because, you see, my mother was a Presbyterian originally. She was a Scotch family, and they're all Presbyterians in those days. And my father, I don't know if my father ever believed very much in anything, but still. Anyway, we'd been taught about the New Testament, but what we got hold of was hellfire. My eldest brother and I, he was 17 years older than I am, and we compared notes afterwards, and we both saw that we didn't sleep at night with terror of what was going to happen to us, because we had no doubt we were completely given over to evil. And Jung said too, I got a lot of projections afterwards in the cathedral close, and from all the hundreds of parsons I knew. And I loathed parsons when I was young. Very funny, I opposed Jung writing letters to so many. Often told him, you know you won't do it. No, he said, I'm going on, you may keep your breath to yourself. But now, since his death, I have more parsons than anything else. And I find an extraordinary patience in myself has suddenly descended on me, which I never had before. One realizes how dreadfully difficult it is for them. You see, they're never let be what they are. And Jung said that all these people who didn't want to see their shadows projected them onto me. And therefore, I got really in a horrid state. I was in a horrid state when I came down here. I don't mean I was crazy in any way. I remember saying to Jung, do you think I'm psychotic? He said, oh, don't add another to your many illusions. But I was very, very badly, shattered by that. He said I got both the church and the world pressed at me like that. Because my mother was very fond of society and had a lot of aristocratic friends. And my father was well, no, he loved them too much. He was very snobbish, really. And so I was supposed to behave like a perfect lady, and also like a very devout Christian. When my father hadn't enough people in the cathedral at daily services, he made my governess and myself come just to make two more. So you can imagine how the whole, it didn't mean a thing to me. But I got back to realizing the essentials, not of the church, but of the fact that one can't live without realizing there is something much more than we see and can feel and speak.
Can you talk a little about the experience of the transference in...
The experience of the what?
Of the transference in its implications for a religious discovery.
Jung wrote a book on the transference, and it's very difficult. I just read it again. In fact, I've read it, I wouldn't like to say how many times. But, well, of course, at first you think you just fallen passionately in love with our analyst. Nothing else. I mean, one doesn't see anything else and projects the most absurd things onto him. And then, slowly, you begin to realize there's another reality in which the whole thing makes sense. You see, he says in the Psychology of Transference that the really important relationship is between the animus of the patient and the anima of the doctor, or reversed, of course, if the analyst's a woman. And that is far more important, only you mustn't use it to get out of anything, to shirk things in the personal relationship. But it isn't the personal relationship. You slowly come to see that. And then all the nonsense begins to peel off, because it's full of nonsense at first. Oh, apparent nonsense. Mm-hmm. You see, it's ridiculous to think that an analyst like Jung could possibly be in love with all his patients, which he wasn't at all. And yet he always gave them what belonged to them. That's how one could always analyze with him. One knew what belonged to one got, and nothing more. And one wanted greedy which didn't belong to one. But slowly you began, oh, well, it took me years and years to do it. I must say, these last years I think I had were really just calm relationship.
Yes, you describe a certain quality in your relationship in the later years of real exchange. You could say what you had to say to him.
I could say what I could say to him. I give an example in my book of how you could. He says that any transference which hasn't ended before it should, I mean it has to go right through, must change from transference to an individual relationship. And that implies the patient giving to the doctor the same ruthless criticism as he himself got in the analysis, because you do get ruthless criticism. I got it in the first hour. And he took it, he did. If you attacked him with the animus, it had nothing to do with it. But if you attacked him honestly, I mean, you thought it over and you knew that was disturbing you, he'd always take it, which a good many analysts find very difficult.
What about this freedom to have a relationship with patients? Analysts can't do that with all patients.
Well, you see, it's a big mistake to think all patients go the way of the process of individuation. I remember when I first began to analyze, he told me, now don't you go get the idea that everybody's coming to you to get individuated. Most of them have hit a snag. And what they, in life, you see, which is stopping their progress. And what you've got to do is to help them dissolve it. Help them to get straight with it. Mm. And it's in just a few cases, it is the process of individuation. And then he had amazing power of giving a relationship, you know. I mean, of being... Oh, I can't quite explain to you. It's, he was completely himself. And that, I remember the very last drive I went with him, he said, you know, you shouldn't drive with me now because I'm too ill, I can't think of anything interesting to say. And I said, well, it's all very well to talk like that, but for me, if I come to see you, it's like the sun shining. And if I can't see you at all, the sun seems to go in. Now, he found it very difficult to see that, but that was how it was. He didn't do anything consciously, practically. I mean, of those sort of things. It was purely done through him. And sometimes he'd be quite unfair to one. And he'd told me, at the club, for instance, he'd go and sometimes be horrid to people. And then he'd go home saying, now, wasn't that nasty of me? I really spoilt their weekend, and so it was always on Saturday evenings. But when they next came to analysis, he found that that particular nastiness was exactly what they wanted, what they needed. I really got more from Jung when he hit me over the head than any other time. I don't mean literally. Though it is, he does say in one place that one patient was sent to him as one consultation because he always quarrelled with the doctors and had a stand-up fight with them. And so things went all right for a bit, and then he said something. She got in an awful fury and began to get up and Shaw was going to attack her. So he said, all right, you can attack me, ladies first. But afterwards, I hit, and then you'll know about it. And curiously enough, she didn't do it. Thought it wise or not. His best quality of all, and that I couldn't give in the book, I tried, was his sense of humour. He really could, you know, just say the one thing. Schopenhauer said that humour was the only divine quality of man. And that Basel helped him with a lot. The Baselers have an extraordinary sense of humour, and their carnival is really marvellous. If you want to know what Swiss carnival is, go to Basel.
Jung took you there once to the
Yes,
Basel.
he did. A lot of us, we went there the night before and got up at 4 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, I think, to see the so-called Morgenstreich. It's quite dark still because it's in the middle of the winter. And the procession comes through with lights. It's most impressive. And what's so impressive is that they haven't the spirit of it. They never go too far. Whereas in Zurich, they go too far very quickly. When I try to convey his sense of humour, I can't. But he always had the right thing to say to make you laugh.
I remember another part of your book at the end when you drove Jung, I think it was the last drive, and you were stopped by wedding processions.
Yes.
Three
times. It was our last drive, and exactly a month before he died. It was on the 6th of May. And 3 times we were held up by them. The last one, he made me turn and go a different way home because it kept us so long. And you see, if you read Dr. von Franz's book, there he talks a lot about the so-called Todeshochzeit. That's the marriage in death. And And Jung himself, in Memories, gives several examples in the experience he had in visions. You remember?
Yes, I do. Mm-hmm.
And well, for instance, St. Augustine said that Christ hurried to the marriage bed of the cross. And then Jung had that extraordinary experience when Mrs. Jung, when old Mrs. Jung, his mother, died. He went back by the night train immediately when they telegraphed to him. And he was awfully upset because he was really very, very fond of her, though. He was very firm about getting away from her, but he was very fond of her. And he then, in the train going back, though he was so terribly upset, he kept giving way to a mood of extraordinary festivity, as if something wonderful had happened. Sort of marriage bells. So it is, in a way, I mean, it's an idea that you meet in a lot of places. The fact that death is the first real, true experience of what the Hieroskamos is.
I wanted to ask you about the idea of the subtle body.
There's a very good Chinese article of Wilhelm's which gives how the Confucians regard the subtle body. They think it absolutely necessary that we should concentrate in our lifetime on building a second subtle body, so as when our spirits leave, or our souls leave this body, we should have somewhere to go. But they admit it's a terribly difficult thing to do. But if you do, apparently, you see, it's not nirvana. It's keeping your identity.
Did you imply in your book, Jung had a dream about the second Bollingen?
Yes, he did.
Very late.
Oh, he had them, I think, when I was first here even.
Oh.
For many years, but they were in different stages of construction. And just towards the end, he had a dream of it being complete. And then there was a mother wolverine teaching her baby to swim. Mother Nature prepared to take him over and learn how to, I mean, I suppose it's just different. Heaven knows what it is like. I think it'd be very interesting to find out. I'm not like Shelley, though, you know. Shelley was always taking people out in sailing boats and then saying, shall we solve the great mystery? I'm very surprised none of them wanted to solve it. I don't want to go any... You must go the right time, I'm sure. That the Confucians say is tremendously important. Mm-hmm. They won't say a man is fortunate till he's met the right death. Mm. Only then will they do so.
So do you see a parallel with the individuation process?
Oh, right through, yes. Mm. You know, Jung once said to me, if you dig deep enough in any attempt to understand the other world, or whatever you like to call it, We always come on the individuation process because it is an archetype that's deeply buried in every person. Only a few seem to want to, or to have the vocation to bring it into reality. But he speaks of it being very often like the crystal, or what do they call it, the matrix of the crystal, or the, you know, in old age, words go from you, they come back, framework of a crystal. It's in the solution from the beginning, but it seems to be something to do with you, with how you live and what you think about and do, whether it crystallizes or not. I mean, that's only a simile, of course.
But in the idea of relating to the self,
Yes.
is there then this idea of touching something eternal, building a house?
Yes, there is, undoubtedly. Jung himself expressed it as he always felt that human life was like a blossom coming up and withering and dying, living a day, so to speak. But he never lost the feeling for a richoma, a root underneath that persevered.
What about this idea that an identity remains an identity? That's very...
Well, you are asking me difficult questions now. But I once had a dream that Jung said the great temptation after death was to go into nirvana. And then you lost all identity and all wish to help the world. One doesn't know whether these things are Jung himself or something in one's own unconscious. I dream of him frequently, and a lot of people do, and do active imagination with him. But I always tell them they mustn't, you know, he says in Memories, we are not sure it's the dead person, that we've no means of telling. We only, maybe, you see, this figure that helps people, maybe an archetype which he brought nearer to consciousness. I really, one doesn't know.
No. He did talk about a dream of Emma after
Dream
her,
of what?
of Emma, his wife, after her death,
Yes.
in which there was this peculiar quality of color.
Yes, that she was completely, it was very interesting that, because she suffered rather from that during his illness, his big illness in 1944, which he writes about in Memories. Because he was so remote, he didn't want to come back to the earth at all. But she had that same remote and completely objective, he says, as if she passed beyond the mist of emotions. Yes, he was enormously impressed by that dream. He also had one of Tony Wolff, but rather differently. With her, he saw her on Easter Eve in a frock of all, like a bird of all colours, but particularly kingfisher blue. And she also just looked at him and nothing else. It made a great impression on him. It was just on the night of Easter Eve.
Was that long after her death, Tony?
No. I couldn't tell you exactly. I saw him 3 days after her death, I think, or 2 days after her death. Not long, and he told me then.
One of the things I appreciate about your book is your open discussion of the problem of jealousy in Jung's life. It must have been there.
Of course it was.
Yeah. Hmm.
Of course it was. They had very hard time with it at one time. But he always said jealousy, I say that in my book, was lack of love. And somehow they always got round it. But of course it was terribly difficult for them both, obviously.
In that connection, I wanted to ask you to say more about how you experienced the dark side in Jung as a whole human being, his dark side. Not...
Before lunch, you'd let me off easily. Well, I'll give you an example. When he asked me to translate Psychology and Alchemy, and I spent 3 years in doing it. It's an awfully difficult book to translate. And I went through it twice with Mrs. Jung afterwards, and he went through a lot of it. And then the collected works, they took it, King Paul took it and paid for it. Very low, but he did pay. And then they decided that all the collected works must be done by Hull. And for 1 whole year, Dr. Jung held out and said no, he liked my translation, he wished it used. But they went on, he always did that. If people went on long enough, he said, very well, have it your own way, always. And so he did. Well, then, if you please, they told me that Jung had promised to tell me. He said, yes, he said, they asked him, they said, well, you'll tell Miss Hannah, won't you? He said, indeed I won't. I didn't wish to do it. You can take your own chestnuts out of the fire. But they didn't. They said he promised to tell me. And he was away. So I got in an awful state with him. I felt really, take 3 years of my life like that was the limit. And I got in a rightful fury. And then came one of those silences one often gets after a fury. And a voice said, if you can stand this, the eternal water must flow. Well, somehow or other I got a little bit like I did out of my jealousy, you know. I mean, I accepted it. And then he came back, and I asked him about it, and then he told me what had really happened. And, but that gave me more. You see, in a way, he had let me down. I'd done 3 years. He'd stuck it out for a year. But he had, in a way, let me down. So, and that did more for me than any good he ever did me. I mean, I got more out of it. That's the only example I can remember.
That's a very good example. Very.
My poor little Cairn dog, who got on, he was dying. I knew she had a cancer and couldn't last very long. And I cried with fury when, I don't often cry, but I did then, when it happened. And she came up and said, oh, but you can't cry when I'm here. And then, of course, made it much worse because I knew she wouldn't be here more than a week or two more. But she meant very well.
Well, you say in your book, you quote Jung as saying, God asks man to do the evil thing, and he must obey. And then you talk about the right moment, the kairos.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yes, if I remember rightly, I took the example of the time he had to think the thought of God defecating on Basel Cathedral through, which he'd stuck out for 3 days without letting it come. And that is the... You see, you can't do... I mean, it is evil in a way. Blasphemous thought it was. Don't know if anybody's ever thought it before. I've never heard of it anyway. And you can't do those things at the wrong time. If he'd done it right off, it'd probably been wrong. But by suffering all that amount, it was right, and it was succeeded with the first experience he ever had of grace. But you see, there are two ways of doing wrong. One is doing it consciously because you feel God wants you to, or self wants you to. And there's the way that most people do it, getting possessed by it, so you can't resist it. And there's absolutely no good in that.
The problem of evil, though, is a very heavy problem right now in the world and in individuals.
It's the heaviest problem there is. He says in late thoughts, in memories, we must learn to, he points out it seems to have taken permanent form in Russia, and it began in Germany. And it's evidently there to stay. And he said, since it has come to stay, we must learn to get along with it. But how that's to be done without terrible consequences cannot at present be imagined. It is, but you see, something must be done, because for 2,000 years the Christian religion has told you to repress the evil, and look at the damn thing now. I mean, we've never had such an outbreak of evil in the world as there is these last, well, it began to be so visible at the First World War, and that's now a very great many years ago, isn't it? Not sure.
And it's on a much grander scale, much larger scale, the possibility.
Oh, far. Far. It's possession by evil that is so awful. It's very difficult to touch it without getting possessed by it. You're quite right. It's the most difficult problem. But it's forced on us. That's not one would take voluntarily. But I mean, look at the world. Pick up any paper.
What do you think the effect of the publishing of Jung's work and his students' work will be? Not everyone can go into analysis,
Well, one doesn't know. He himself reckoned, Meister Eckhart, who was also a very great man. I don't know if you ever read his books, but they are, his works at all, but they are marvelous. And he went into oblivion. It was taken by the Inquisition, and just a few copies were kept in monasteries, secretly. Mm-hmm. But it was 600 years before they came up again. And Jung himself reckoned with that happening to his work.
He did.
He did. But it doesn't seem to be yet happening. He's better known by far now than when he died, isn't he?
Yes. Yes. He felt his work would be suppressed.
Because largely people are terrified. As you say, this accepting evil is the worst problem in the world, and people naturally move away. But we can't. I don't know. I can't tell at all what the future will be of his books.
Do you think that someone can learn a lot without going into an analytic relationship? Can it have a positive effect without involving an analysis?
Well, I tell in my book of people of that, his 80th birthday, when there were a whole lot of people, certainly never been in analysis, he thought we'd never seen them. And he said they'd read his books and they'd silently changed their lives. Yes, I do think it can have a tremendous effect if it hits their own unconscious. Mm-hmm. They won't just, the intellectual is no good. You only get nothing that's really important with only the intellect. But a lot of these people get it with a great deal more than that. So I'm not a missionary for analysis. Not at all.
His books often have that effect, though, a very powerful emotional effect
on people, both positive and negative. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. At one time, the university here had them mentioned by students. They were even told to take them out of their theses. And now I'm told by students who are working there now that he's talked of quite as much as Freud here. And that's the least likely place to recognize it.
In his own home ground.
Exactly. Exactly. So when the city of Zurich gave him the literature prize, he said, "Now I'm deprived from saying a prophet is not without honor."
How do you feel after living 50 years almost of your life here in Switzerland? How do you feel about your own birthplace, England?
My England's gone, you know. It's a totally different England to the England that I was brought up in. But I think the only thing I really miss in Switzerland, that's the sea. I miss the sea terribly. Mm. But otherwise, I really don't miss anything. And I never talk of going home when I'm going to England. I always am going to England and I'm coming home here. Mm. No, I feel absolutely identified with the Swiss.
Mm-hmm. And rooted in this soil.
Rooted in this. In fact, I would have become Swiss, but my my lawyer said, didn't think it was worth 10,000 francs, which it cost, so I bought the Mini instead. But still, if we get into a red government, I may yet do it. But I don't think we shall.
You mean England?
England, I mean. Yes, I still have a British passport. Well, I don't deny my origin at all. But I've spent a good deal more than half my life here. And it's become my home.
When did you know you would stay on?
I don't think I knew it for a long time, because Jung wasn't keen on people uprooting, and he never would say, he left me with a conflict of whether, I wanted it that you always do when you're in a long analysis, you think it'd be nice to analyze other people instead. Much pleasanter to show them their shadow than constantly have yours pointed out to you. And so he always said, yes, of course, if you go back to England, but you can't here, because at that time I had no permit to earn money or in fact to. And there was great difficulty with lay analysts at the beginning. He had difficulty with both his wife and Tony Wolfe. And so he wouldn't say whether I should stay here or not. He tried to force me back into painting by it. He said, of course you could stay here. And but then I had a dream when the Second World War broke out that I was coming on the last train from England to Switzerland, and when I got into the thing, I couldn't find my passport anywhere. I thought, well, it's the last train, I'll just have to bluff my way through somehow. And then when the train started, and I looked again, I found it quite easily, but it was a Swiss passport instead of a... So then Jung said, now we'll not ever discuss the matter again, you belong here. That was the moment it was decided, though I certainly wanted to for at least 4 years before then.
He didn't encourage a dependency.
Oh, not at all. Not at all. You had to earn staying around him by doing creative work. If you didn't, you wouldn't have been allowed to stay. No, he didn't encourage dependency at all. Far the contrary. He always said active imagination was a touchstone of whether somebody wanted to become independent or wanted to remain a satellite.